Great. Well, thank you all so much for coming, first of all. So I'm not an architect, I'm not an engineer, so just as a bit of a preface, this project really began as a whim, as a curiosity. I spent 7 years giving architecture tours on a riverboat, not CAF, sadly. I was doing it to help pay the bills. But spending all that time seeing these spaces, these sort of pinnacles of skyscrapers all around the city, and being asked questions, and myself going hunting around trying to find out more information about what actually happens up in those spaces, or happened up in those spaces historically, and realizing quite quickly there was very little about them available in the books, very few photographs and very few stories. And the one thing we decided we weren't going to do was private dwellings and penthouses. Decided that was a different category. We were interested in the idea of public spaces at the top, or at least communal spaces. So we actually open up with a short introduction looking back over the centuries at all the other examples of how people were drawn to climb above cities in various ways. And just to rattle off a few of them, but everything from the Tower of Babel to all of the towers in medieval Italy, these are the 2 towers in Bologna, to this squat little tower. It hardly counts as a tower, but it represents an important trend, which are artists and writers withdrawing to towers as a place to think and work. Anyone know who that is on the left? Out of curiosity, how familiar he is? Well, it's John T. McCutcheon, the famous cartoonist who worked for the Tribune and other papers. McCutcheon asked to be up in the very top of the building, and actually other editorial cartoonists joined him up there. And for several decades, the very pinnacle of the building was this little entourage of cartoonists, of artists. But of course, the first great example of the public being able to experience the thrill of climbing above the city was the auditorium on the left there in 1889, and had incredible array of gadgets, new technology. A decade or so later, they tested out the heliotrope, this sort of light-based way of communicating across long distances, and sent soldiers way out to River Forest and communicated by sending beams of light back and forth. But here we have to the left the Masonic Temple building, one time the tallest in the city. Over there on the left, tallest in the world, in fact, that's right. On top of this, when it opened, there was a public roof garden that was really trend-setting and never really matched, even till to this day in Chicago history, as far as being a truly public space at the top of a building. People from a wide variety of social classes could go there. It was fairly affordable, and it was known for being one of the few places where fairly working-class people or sort of young copyists and apprentices in the city could mingle with sort of high-end society. So let's move on now to the Montgomery Ward building. It still exists, but sadly decapitated, just up the street a few blocks on Michigan Avenue. But at one time, when this opened again, one of the absolute icons of visiting the city from above. But Montgomery Ward himself was a person who created a lot of ambivalence in Chicago. He had a lot of enemies, right? He was known for being fairly much defying the conventional sentiment about lots of things. And as a result, the building became mythologized in some very strange ways. Everyone became convinced there was a dangerous eagle camped out at the top of the Montgomery Ward Tower that was swooping down and either stealing little dogs or even trying to steal infants and babies and taking them back up to the tower. It turned out that it was just people concluded it was just the statue and the way she was holding her torch that looked like an eagle. But for the whole week, crowds would gather and look at it and convinced they spotted the eagle, and it became really a media sensation. It was a long story, something that would almost appear in The Onion these days, describing how Chicago had been invaded by dozens of dinosaurs that came down from Canada. So you also see, in some sense, barely a decade, 15 years after the first skyscrapers, already these mythologies, these archetypes that Hollywood continues to this day of imagining the destruction of these buildings. It's just beneath the observation deck at the top of the Board of Trade building. There were television studios for a number of years, and that's actually where Soul Train began. Something fascinatingly poetic about Board of Trade stock traders being there during the week, wearing their colorful outfits, making wild gestures, and then on weekends, these kids come for Soul Train wearing their colorful outfits, also making wild gestures, just not making nearly as much money doing it. In a great way, the timing has been wonderful because for a number of decades, the tops of buildings had really seemingly lost their romance. There wasn't much happening. But really just since the turn of the millennium, it seems that there's been a bit of a resurgence. That's a quick overview. The book's due out in about a year and a half. When the book does come out, we're planning on having some events in some of these spaces as well, so keep an eye out for that.